Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy in the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith. Good morning, Shannon.
Hello,
Welcome
Leslie.
back.
Thank you.
This
Good
is
to be here.
Great.
With you and our audience.
Yes, great. So, you were talking about this idea a little bit earlier about getting out of your comfort zone.
I like how you phrased it. Your discomfort zone.
Discomfort zone.
Whoa.
She's feeling punny. Yeah, I needed to come up with a pithy title. So,
Yes.
Behold.
Yes. I love this because so often I know as human beings, we want to be around people that are like ourselves, right?
Yeah, sure.
And that's not always necessarily the best route for growth.
Okay.
So the way this started for me was back after undergrad. I worked for a bank for 3 years and had wanted to go serve overseas as a missionary. And I ended up going to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed over there for a year teaching English with a mission agency.
Okay.
So, and what I found in that year, it was one of the hardest, most difficult experiences of my life, but probably one of the most growth producing.
Okay.
Because what I found was about 6 months in, I realized the newness of it had worn off and I couldn't blend in.
Okay.
And so I was around, people were still coming up and touching my hair. I was on the outskirts of Tokyo.
Okay.
And, I was different.
Yeah.
And so number one, I saw what it feels like to be treated differently because of the way you look.
Sure.
But I made a vow to myself that I've kept for most of the years of my life, that I would never put myself around people that totally looked like me.
Okay.
Ever again for work and living.
Okay.
So, for instance, when I worked in Scarsdale, I lived in White Plains in an interracial neighborhood. When I worked here last time, I lived over in Mount Kisco, where there was tremendous racial and socioeconomic diversity.
Mm-hmm.
I now live in Greenwich, so I'm not always doing it. But, I will say that each of those experiences allowed me to kind of push up against what was uncomfortable in myself and to kind of be not hypervigilant, but just kind of aware that not everybody is always treated the same.
Okay.
So some of the ways that I've continued to do that when I have lived, like when I lived in Wilton, and before that, I would take congregants down to New York City to work with the homeless and be around people who were different. The way that that's worked for me is to see the face of God in other people and to continue to kind of press on what my assumptions are about sameness and to learn from other points of view.
Yeah.
So, for instance, before I would go down with this incredible organization called the Midnight Run, where you actually you gather a group of people. It's out of Ossining, New York, and it's been around for like 40 years. But they're probably like, I'd say maybe 300 churches, synagogues, schools in the tri-state area that participate in this, probably 5 nights a week down in New York City, where they gather up food and clothing and go down to a specific route because it's organized. And you go, and it's a ministry of hospitality where you are talking with people who have come. There are people who are homeless that are on the board of directors, so they know about this, and they can get people to the different spots. But you talk to people and make conversation and offer hospitality. And what I have said before I have gone is, we are going, and you will see the face of God in these homeless people. That's kind of what my experience is it's a spiritual experience of being around people who are different, who look different than me, who have a different experience than me, whether it's economically or racially or culturally. That it forces me to look at my own biases and to extend a hand of welcome and the assumption that God is in that person. So I thought we might talk a little bit about what is it for you and me, and what is it possibly to get our viewing and listening audience thinking about what is it that gets you outside of your own presumptions and keeps you growing spiritually.
Yeah.
In your sphere, in your life. So, another way, one of the things that when I was here before, we took a couple of trips down to Nicaragua to go live out in very rural areas. The participants, and we had like 15 go at a time, ate rice and beans, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, stayed on cots with mosquito netting. We built a house or a church for the community where they actually chose who would get it. It's a wonderful organization called Bridges to Community, again, out of Austin, that allows you to see in a very drastic way the different ways that people live and the joy that can be found in that kind of situation. So that allowed people to get out of their comfort zones for a week and then come back and say, okay, how does this fit in my life? How about you? Any experience for you, whether travel or even local?
Yeah. Well, mine's not as exciting as yours, but it did make me think of, so when I was between my summer between high school and college, so I was, people don't know my little bit of my not very exciting story is that I'm born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and then left to go to Cleveland for college, but literally had been, from the time I was 1, lived in the same house. Life was very like consistent and safe. And I went to a pretty diverse high school. So it wasn't like I wasn't around any real diversity. And that was really, really great. But it was I hadn't really had like an adult experience outside of the country for sure. And my parents took me on a like couple week trip abroad. So we did England and France and Austria and Italy. Is that right? Yeah. And it was, which is still fairly, Western Europe. Yeah. So it wasn't like we were totally out of our comfort zone. And we eased in by starting in England. It's like London is basically New York with a better accent. But then we started to push a little bit more where you don't necessarily know the language. I knew a little bit of French from high school. So then we went to Paris next, which is amazing. And then we started to go further on. But it really, that experience, I think I'd had a very American bias towards like America and the world that I didn't realize I had. And it was very eye-opening to like, you kind of, I don't know, I feel like I subconsciously thought, well, everything's just kind of better in America. And I was like, oh no, they experience life in the world in such a different way that to me felt deeper and richer, kind of magical. Obviously, I was on vacation, so everything felt very mellow. Versus living there for a long amount of time, to the point of when I was making a big move when I was 30. This is a hilarious sentence. The choice was going to be either move to Connecticut or move to France.
Interesting.
I really was but there's a lot of red tape with musicians and organists and moving over there. There's it was too much red tape that I could deal with at the time. So I was like, I'm just.
So what was the draw then to France? I mean, what would have been?
I don't know is the short answer. I've just always felt great there. There's just something in the air. There's something about the language. That whole sort of, that or England. Speaking of comfort, England, I love being in England. I love everything about it. I watch so much British television and film and media. But it feels too easy for me. I think it felt like a little bit of a push. I've never been super great at languages. So it felt like, well, the only way to do it is just to like throw yourself in there.
Exactly.
I'm actually really curious about, you were telling us about your experience of living in Japan. And, I can totally appreciate the idea that like some days you just want to like not be obviously different and you just kind of want to hide back a little bit. So what took you from the place of I just want to hide, or I'm putting my own thing on what you said, but like I I would like to fit in at least for one day to this point of this is important for me. So what was that trend? Like what took you from I am uncomfortable to I want to stay uncomfortable?
That's a great question. And I think it's one that still applies to whether or not we want to be in conversation with people who think differently than us, which, our country's so divided.
Right.
To engage in opinions that are different than our own.
Right.
To who do you have around your dinner table kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, that's I haven't really thought about it in those terms. What was the move? I really bottomed out about, I there were a lot of tears. I soul searched. I prayed so much and thought about, I want to come home. And then it was turning it around and thinking, okay, I'm on the second half of this. And I think it was a real spiritual experience of moving around and saying, wow, and kind of going from this is happening to me to I can be an agent in my world. So thank you for that. That's really good. And I would say I still want to go hide sometimes. I mean, I think I'm kind of right on the line between extrovert and introvert. So there are times when I do want to go and just zone out.
Sure.
But then there are times that, sorry, but I just lost my earplugs. There are times when, for instance, in my last congregation, we had a relationship with an African-American Baptist church. And particularly as all of the racial reckoning incidents were coming up around police brutality, that we had a relationship with the pastor of this church and the congregation. And he became such a good friend that he ended up doing my marriage 3 years ago, my wedding. And he invited me one night to a Black Baptist prayer meeting that was in Bridgeport. And I took my daughter and I said, it's important for us to go. Yeah. And we were the only white people there in this very large congregation. And it felt so important for me, and to model that for my daughter, to step out and to say, we are all, what is the commonality here? We are all human beings who suffer.
Yeah.
And to go in and to listen and to not be afraid of being different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there are times when I can do that and choose to do that, and times when I want to just curl back and be in the comfort of my own home and not be around difference. But it always pushes me to something more of, I think, the kingdom of God, because God embraces diversity.
Right.
Right. God doesn't want us to be around people that, I mean, look at what a motley crew the disciples were, right? That Jesus was around.
Right. Right.
And Jesus interacted with people that were very different from himself.
Right.
And constantly pushed boundaries. So I think for me, it's a little bit of a spiritual journey to do that, and to kind of be forced to look at what's comfortable and how I can fall into that too easily, and that's kind of lazy for me.
Sure. It puts me in mind of a couple things musically, because it's so funny. I've had this memory pop up in my mind twice in the past week, that when I was sort of late high school, my voice teacher, mentor, all around awesome lady, her name is Mary Hoffman. Hi, Mary. She went to do a choral workshop at, I want to say it was Ebenezer Baptist Church in downtown Atlanta. And that was out of my comfort zone. And I was basically there to observe. I think I played a little piano to just help out. And she did this whole choral workshop with their choir. And it was like just the most joyful, incredible, like hour and a half experience of choral music ever. And then if you can go back and watch it. It's on our YouTube channel. We did last year 2 hymposiums where we talked about hymn singing. The second one was with a guy out of the Hymn Society his name is Brian Wren. And we had a fabulous conversation about singing each other's songs and about the power of acknowledging one another through our song. And that's honestly been something I have been working through myself intellectually about, especially with African American spirituals. Mm-hmm. I am very hesitant to bring certain spirituals to my choirs. Mm-hmm. My choirs have tended to be fully white people, fully white affluent people. And it feels like we are singing this music to feel a certain way and to feel good about ourselves in a certain way, and not in a way that sees and honors the community that they come from. And I think I'm still learning about how to approach this music in a way that is not cultural. Help me.
Co-opting.
Yes, thank you. And is in fact honoring. And I think there's a big difference.
Huge difference. Thank you for that. And I think the difference in my own mind is relationship. And if you, so for instance, like in seminary, I had a singing friend who, Sandra Booth Bailey, is her name. And she not only is a theologian, but she's a musician in Harlem. And she and I would sing spirituals together, so that she would invite me in to sing with her, to experience that together.
Wonderful,
right?
Yeah.
So different than co-opting. If you're joining in, it's like, again, who's around your dinner table, right?
You're doing it together.
But I love that, and love Brian Wren, by the way.
Yeah.
But singing another person's song without co-opting it, right? So how do you listen to someone else's experience? I mean, it could even be in the context of this conversation, reading outside of the genre you're accustomed to, right? That's a way to push a boundary.
Yeah.
Listening to a different kind of music and appreciating it, and then asking the experience of someone from that community, maybe, to be in conversation with you. So, yeah.
It also puts me in mind of actually our first Hymposium guest, the great Mark Miller. So we've talked about him on the podcast before, but if those who are not familiar with him, Mark Miller, he and his sister actually were adopted by white parents. And he was raised in probably a similar upbringing to mine. And he went to Juilliard for college. Very, very fine organist. He got his first job at a Black Methodist church, and went to play, I think, one of the hymns, which was "This Little Light of Mine." Now, the problem with the United Methodist Church hymnal, one of them, is that the tune of "This Little Light of Mine" is not the one you are currently singing to yourself in your head. It is, it goes, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." Now, who in the world has ever sung that tune?
Right. It's "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine."
Right? That's what they wanted. But he'd been raised the way I'd been raised, which is you play the music on the page.
Oh.
And he started the hymn, and the pastor stopped him.
Oh.
And they did it without organ or piano or whatever. I don't remember what console he was sitting at. And they did it without him. And he was mortified, like any 20-something organist would be, right? Like devastated.
How long did he stay in that church?
Years. Oh. Because he realized that it was not innate that he would know how to play this music because he is a person of color. He had to learn how to play this music. And so he worked really hard. And now he's, one of the keyboard skills to kill all keyboard skills. So when I had the great, just honor to take his class at Yale, which I lovingly dubbed the teaching white kids from the suburbs how to play gospel music class, which was my favorite class in grad school.
I'm sure.
I took it twice. Didn't have to. It was the same class.
Yeah.
But he would always bring in. So the best part was he would bring in music he was working on. So I've got all these like half done manuscripts of his. Oh my gosh, it's an incredible musician. Check him out if you don't know. But we're big fans here.
Yes.
And so, but he taught us all how to like play off the page.
Right.
Which there's a huge tradition in organ playing and a huge tradition in church music of playing off the page. But
Talk about your discomfort zone.
Oh my gosh. Oh, like you want me to do what?
Right.
And it's so funny now because we were doing some hymn. When was it? It might have been on this past Sunday. We did a hymn and the arrangement was kind of weird where it was like one note for the pedal and then it was like a bunch of right hand chords and if I'd played it according to the page, my left hand would have just been like having nothing to do. So you fill it in. And I realized like halfway through that I was like, oh, that's not something I could have done 15 years ago. Like,
and what's the difference?
The practice.
What do you think the difference in you has been?
I think it's been so empowering. I think to be able to do that, you mean?
Yeah. What was the change in you that allowed you to do that?
For that specifically, I think because Mark created such a just encouraging, he's such a gentle spirit. And like that class had that, like, if you're trying, then you're doing great.
So
kind
do
of
you
vibe.
think getting out of your comfort zone,
Oh, it transformed me as a musician.
that you need a mentor or someone to kind of nudge you along?
Yeah, I think I did. I think I had a lot of probably fear about it because I was like,
Of course. Me
even
too.
with like organ improvisation, and like I went to like, Eastman has this huge summer improv fest that they do every couple of years, I want to say. And I went and it was like me, a bunch of like 45, 50-year-old people. And I was like 17. And it was great, but it also was really intimidating and really like I had a big imposter syndrome in that. And then taking Mark's class was, I was with my friends, all of us, we were all the same year. Yale takes 6 organists a year. So you become this kind of like little group of sort of friends. And so he created the situation of just like, if you're trying and if you've done the work, then that's what I expect of you. And it just kind of grew over the years. I did have a class in college. What was it called? It was like keyboard skills. Like they don't put a lot of effort into the name of these classes. But the point of it was for I minored in a thing called Dalcroze Eurythmics. And we can dive into this another day. There's a lot of spirituality there. But it's about like sort of improvising at the piano. So that was sort of the start of that. And so it's been the thing that's building, but I think having someone who kind of nudges you gently, or even better, says, come along with me.
Yes.
Then it's like, oh, the water's warm. I can contribute. I can bring something. I can show up in a way that is authentic and also, because my keyboard technique doesn't sound like his, doesn't sound like anybody's. Like we all sound different. And week to week, I don't sound the same.
And that's such a metaphor. We all sound different.
Yeah.
Right? As human beings.
Absolutely.
We all do.
Totally.
And that's so maybe as we wrap this up a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe the challenge for all of us, for you and me, for our listening audience and visual audience, is to think about how we might bring someone along to help them grow and to see outside of their comfort zone.
I love that.
To kind of to make the richness of the world come alive more, right? Because that really is the kingdom of God.
Right.
When we experience all these different things and not just kind of stay off in pockets of sameness.
And it's like painting or doing any sort of art. When you have all the colors of the rainbow, it's so much richer for it.
All needed.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me.
We were all over the place on this.
Well, I was here, so that was going to happen.
Exactly. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for being here with us. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillcommunitychurch.org.